Aloha, welcome back to Aina Bear Farm. Wanted to do a video today on some of the routine maintenance that we do out here in our food forest, specifically around the comfrey plant. So most of you that are familiar with permaculture are probably pretty familiar with this plant. It's kind of an all-star plant in the permaculture world because it's got so many different functions and just serves so many different purposes out here in the food forest and edible landscapes and things like that. If you're not growing this plant already, I would highly suggest you do, and I'm going to explain why as we kind of show it off here, and we'll see the whole plant in just a second here, but this is one of the leaves. It's in the tropics, it's a tender perennial, or herbaceous perennial. It doesn't grow like woody stems or trunks or anything like that. Stays in the 2 to 3 foot tall range. And in colder climates, it's a tender perennial that dies to the ground every year. So it should come back for many years, but you won't see the top of it in winter. It's got a very long taproot that really gives it one of its distinguishing features for permaculture use, which is that we call it a mineral miner. That taproot every year just gets longer and goes down and pulls up minerals that are deep in the ground that most of our fruit trees aren't going to have access to because their roots tend to go more out as opposed to down. And so that means this plant is picking up really key minerals that our trees don't have access to, and it's storing them in this herbaceous leafy material, which we can then come and cut and then throw under our trees as a nutritious mulch fertilizer. So that tends to be its primary use in the permaculture world, is like specifically as a chop and drop plant. And also because it's a very vigorous grower, you can chop it several times throughout the year. So when we lived in Maryland, we were in zone 7B, and starting in late March usually, we'd see little shoots come up, and we could cut this by late April, early May, and then get in at least 2 or 3 more cuts before it died to the ground in November, without ever really slowing down the growth of the plant. Here in the tropics, of course, it grows all year round. You can cut it pretty much whenever you want. But I have heard suggestions of people saying to cut it if you see signs of powdery mildew growing on the leaves. And so that's a fungus that grows on a lot of our plants when the temperatures at night tend to hover between like 55, 65 degrees. It's just perfect for growing this powdery white substance fungus on the leaves. And I've kind of been following that strategy for a while now, and it seems to actually work really well. For whatever reason, it just really reinvigorates the plant. When I see the powdery mildew and I cut it, it comes back really strong and happy. Otherwise, I just try to kind of do it as a routine maintenance. We've got comfrey in certain edges along our paths. We've got it as a companion tree to a lot of our fruit trees. And I like to go through and just kind of cut it all at the same time. So that way I know it's been done and I don't have to kind of think about it as this staggered thing. So I'm probably going to try to cut it all this weekend, feed it to our neighboring fruit trees. And I'll show you right here how we've got it kind of along this path here. And so you can see we've got a plant growing here, a little bit bigger one here, about every 4 feet. And we need to go back and put at least one more plant in between, maybe even 2, because what we're trying to do here is set the edge of this area. We have a path here, and we don't really want weeds to cross either way, really. We've got mostly perennial peanut on this side, and we can encourage that to spread the other way, but any grasses, and we've also got some peppermint over here, really don't want that to run too much and kind of overtake the perennial peanut. So comfrey is a great edge setter because it really suppresses everything around it. That heavy foliage growth creates a lot of shade underneath there. The older leaves end up laying on the ground and just matting and decomposing. I'll show you that in just a minute. So that's another function that it works really great for. Another thing is it's got some healing properties to it. So I actually use it all the time for sprains, bruises, soreness. I've had some terrible tendonitis in my elbow the last few months, and I'll put a wad on my elbow at night and just wrap it when I wake up the next day, it is way better than on the days that I don't do that. It's got a long history of traditional use, particularly by Native Americans, for exactly that. They called it knit bone oftentimes, because if you had a broken bone, this would be used to tie it up with, and it would help kind of knit it back together. Some of that may be attributed to the growth enzymes in here. It's just such a strong grower, and it does have all those different nutrients in it that can penetrate your skin and kind of get in there and help with the healing process, speed it up. Works really well. I don't know 100% how it works, but I can testify that I've used it for many years in that way. Bee stings, all kinds of stuff. It works great. So I'm going to go ahead and chop this plant, and then we're going to throw that down around our Satsuma tangerine over there. I use gloves because it's got little hairy kind of bristles on it that can irritate your fingers a little bit. When you mash it up, those go away, and so when you put it on your skin, it's not an issue. So I just use the gloves to kind of move it out of the way. You could use any kind of knife, anything sharp really, cuts pretty easily. It's got like a gooey kind of sap in there. And then we just take this clump here and throw it down around one of our trees. You can see we've already started with quite a bit. And we're going to cover that with some of our guinea grass, which is like a thick, heavy carbon grass that will keep it in perpetual shade, keep the moisture locked in, and then it'll decompose faster and really start to feed this citrus tree. So it's really wonderful, and I just want to show you this one that we cut down earlier. This was a particularly large one. You can see the circumference around the plant, how it suppresses. You know, this is what this area looks like with no weed suppression, and then this is just from the comfrey, and these are the older leaves that had started to decompose. So you can also kind of get a sense of that rich, dark organic material that will break down as mulch underneath your trees to feed them. It's often spread from cuttings, and so you could dig up this plant, break it up into something this size, at least 6 different plants. Should be pretty healthy and vigorous. Technically, you can buy seeds, but those obviously come from a variety that spreads by seed. Most of the comfrey that is used in most permaculture applications can only be spread by cutting. And I would really caution you against using comfrey that spreads by seed, because it can end up everywhere, and then it's very hard to get rid of, because the stuff that spreads by seed will also spread by cuttings, and if you try to dig it up, little pieces of root, they'll get everywhere. It's not that you can't do it, but you just need to be very careful and put it in the right place and really stay on top of it, manage it. If you know you can cut it every time before it goes to seed, it's really not a big deal. But if you can find a cutting from a variety that doesn't go to seed, it's a lot easier to manage. But that's not something you're going to find in a lot of nurseries or anything like that. So you have to kind of ask around, find people that have it. You can also learn to identify it, so that way if you ever do come upon it, usually it would be somewhere somebody's growing it on purpose, so you'd have to ask them. But if you can dig up just a little piece of root, that's all you need to get started. Within a couple of years, you have plenty of plants of your own. Yeah, so hopefully even if you're already growing this plant, just some of that was helpful for you to kind of think about all the different uses, think about the timing of cutting it. And if you're not growing it, again, highly recommend it. It's a fantastic plant. We love it here. And yeah, we're happy to have it for that use among all kinds of others. So appreciate you watching, and join us again for our next video. We'll see you back here soon at Ina Bear Farm. Aloha.